Good morning, everyone. My name is Christine Cummings, and welcome to session 1 of our 2025 Selling More Maine Foods webinar series. This morning's webinar will specifically focus on labeling essentials, navigating food packaging compliance with confidence. This year's webinar series theme is Package for Success, Mastering Food Labeling, Packaging, and Design. In this series, we'll dive into legal labeling requirements. You'll be able to gain actionable insights to protect your brand, learn to build additional consumer trust, and explore how food packaging design can elevate your brand. As we're getting started, please ensure that you are muted, and this session will be recorded and posted online. Again, if you do not want to be recorded, please ensure that your video remains off. We'd like to take a few moments and recognize the series sponsors, Real Maine. They have invested in and supported the work of Selling More Maine Food series. Real Maine is a program of the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. It connects people with Maine farmers and food producers by sharing their stories and giving consumers access to authentic Maine farm products and experiences, and they support a sector that is essential to the Maine economy. Again, Selling More Maine Foods is an informational and educational series for value-added food and beverage producers here in Maine. Our program is proudly coordinated by 3 organizations, and next we'll take a few minutes to introduce ourselves and give you a brief overview of the work that we do. My name is Christine, as I said. I am the Executive Director of the Maine Grocers and Food Producers Association. MGFPA is a membership-based trade group here in Augusta. We work to represent Main Street businesses, including independently owned and operated grocery stores, convenience stores, supermarkets, food and beverage producers and processors, wholesalers, and a variety of programs and allies. We are primarily a legislative advocacy organization. We are based in Augusta, spend much of my time over at the State House, especially now during the legislative session. And we work closely with a variety of different departments in the state and serve as a liaison for our members. We're a community dedicated to the prosperity of Maine's grocery and food producer industry through excellence in advocacy, networking, and education. So if we can ever be of any assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out. Next, I'll hand it over to Naomi to speak about Maine Center for Entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Christine. I'm Naomi Neville from the Maine Center for Entrepreneurs. It's a nonprofit organization that was established in 1997 to empower and enable Maine's entrepreneurs. In addition to our popular Top Gun program for startup businesses that you may have heard of, we run 2 food accelerator programs, Cultivator and Market Share, which are specifically designed to help established food and beverage and aquaculture companies that are looking to scale up. And we also have some more mature food companies who are ready to expand regionally and nationally. In partnership with Focus Maine, our food accelerator programs provide Maine food and beverage producers with mentoring and consulting by industry experts, learning workshops and webinars in conjunction with this group here and also on our own, and then access to technical assistance resources and funding, as well as market data, all to help strengthen and grow their businesses. We currently have over 50 companies in our programs and have worked with many more than that over the years. We're also lucky to work with a mentor network of over 300 mentors with expert experience across multiple industries, and with 90 of those mentors having direct food and beverage experience, one of which is on our Selling More Maine Foods advisory panel here, Kim Kohler, and she is an instrumental part of this group. So shout out to Kim. And I will pass it on to Bill.
Good morning. I'm Bill Soretta, Executive Director of Fork Food Lab. Fork Food Lab is a food business incubator and shared manufacturing and food processing facility. As many of you know, we have moved to our new facility about 1.5 years ago, and we currently have 17,500 square feet of food manufacturing space, and are in the process of adding another 12,500 over the next few months. We provide space and equipment to help people launch their food businesses. And then we surround that with technical assistance, some provided internally and some provided from our partners here and others who work with the SBA and other programs around the state to support the growth of small businesses. We have several businesses that provide or develop consumer packaged goods, and we are well aware of the importance of labeling in the manufacturing and distribution of products for retail sales. And we're very pleased that this session is being offered, as we think it's a rather important aspect of developing a food business here in Maine. So I hope you all find this seminar helpful, and we look forward to seeing you in the next 3 weeks and additionally in seminars to come. Thank you. And I'd now like to turn it over to Christine.
Great, thank you all. You've been great partners in planning this event so far. So thanks to everyone for joining us. Again, we will have a question and answers period at the conclusion of Ian's presentation. And so we'll work to manage the questions as you all ask them and make any consolidations or summarize questions so that we can be efficient. And again, to ask any questions at any point, you can use the Q&A function. Simply move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, and within the black bar, there's a white Q&A icon you can use, and you can type your questions there. So again, that does differ from the chat function. And just, Amy, if you can hit the next slide, we just want to make sure that we are reminding folks, as Bill gave a good plug, this is a 3-part webinar series. So session 2 is Wednesday the 5th, again with Ian on label claims and certifications, insight, strategy, and compliance. And in addition, session 3 to conclude the series on Wednesday, February 12th, we'll be bringing your brand to life, communicating who you are, and elevating your brand through discovery, strategy, and design with 2 great folks from Pulp and Wire. So if you haven't yet registered for our additional 2 sessions, please do so, and we'll resend that information out to you all as attendees. All right. Perfect. Next slide, Amy. So we'll move into the programming. This morning, we are pleased to have Ian Pasquarelli, the CEO of Kitchen Network, with us this morning. Ian is a native Mainer and has spent the last 14 years operating in every aspect of the food business industry. From leading product development teams for international CPG companies to working closely with fledgling food business startups, he has garnered experience in every stage of business growth. Ian holds a sincere passion for innovating, improving, and expanding the world of consumer packaged goods and food service operations. If you are building, growing, or innovating your food business, Ian and his network of food scientists and culinary professionals can help you reach your goals. This morning, Ian will assist in your understanding of legal labeling requirements, how to craft clear nutrition information, and ingredient panels for seamless retail integration. With that, again, welcome to our Selling More Maine Foods webinar series. And next, we'll turn it over to our guest speaker this morning. Ian, you can take it from here. We'll go ahead and let you put your slides up. Good morning.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine, for the kind introduction. I will go ahead and share my screen now. Okay. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for the introduction. Again, my name is Ian. I'm originally from Holton, up in Aroostook County, which is where I grew up. I currently live down in Boston now, but I travel up all the time, as we were just discussing. I'm up in Bucksport a lot, visiting my mom and visiting family members. So happy to be working with Maine food businesses. I'm certainly passionate about Maine businesses and helping them succeed. Of course, my expertise is in the food industry, but it's been great working with Maine food businesses. I've worked with a lot of Maine food businesses. I'm working with the Maine Center for Entrepreneurs to help out whenever I can, and done a few things here and there with Fork Food Lab with Bill to help them get up and running too, which is just a super fun group to work with. So thank you all for having me. It's great to be here. I'll give you a little more background on what it is I do on a regular basis. So I have a business down here in Boston, a small team of us that are food scientists and chefs, and we do mainly product development. So we are developing every type of CPG product, from beverage to retort to salty snacks to baked goods to frozen to cannabis industry or confectionery. We pretty much have done everything, including some work in supplements as well. But we're not going to talk about supplement labeling today. We're talking strictly food CPG. Leading into this presentation as we get started, just please keep in mind, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not by any means, legal guidance as a a CPG or a packaging lawyer in any way. That being said, we're going to give you a lot of tips and tools to help navigate the process, how to interpret different things, how best to approach the 130-page FDA labeling guide and how it might apply to you. So all this is meant to empower you. It's meant to give you insight, help you understand what applies to you. Not every single slide here may apply to every single one of you, but it's supposed to give you a good understanding. We're going to start with the basics on, really basic first steps into food labeling, how you approach it, but also along the way, try and point out the steps where it makes sense to get help or where you can go for resources or, how to not do this all on your own because it can be really, really intimidating. So yeah, that being said, I know you guys are going to have a lot of questions. I'm sure a lot of you here are going to have really specific questions to your particular food or something you are particularly interested in. And I will absolutely do my best to get you a quick answer. As Christine said, we've got a lot of Q&A time planned for the end of the session because I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. But as we go along, make sure to take notes. I'm sure each individual slide you'll have individual questions for, so I'm happy to jump back in later. We can bring up a slide again, we can walk through it and talk through the questions you might have. But I'll do my best to get through these slides quickly and and hopefully we have time to go through everybody's questions. And again, a big caveat to this leading in is there's a ton of gray area when it comes to food packaging and nutrition labels and statements and everything that goes on your package. So it takes a lot of interpretation, it takes a lot of reading, and it takes a lot of different opinions and inputs to really land on a place where you feel comfortable. And the sort of base problem of that is you as a brand owner or as a manufacturer of your own products, you're responsible for your food packaging. There's nobody you go to that you just have do it, right? There's no FDA people that will make it for you. So you are responsible to adhere to their guidelines, and that can be, really intimidating and really challenging for a lot of brand owners. So hopefully this helps, get you on the right path, at least find a starting point of where to go. Session 2 will dig into a lot of the details, which some of you may have questions on today in terms of, compliance and certifications and claims. That's okay. We'll cover that in session 2. I'm happy to answer some questions today, but let's dig into the basics and then we'll take it from there. And I'll do my best to answer any questions, but realistically, some specific questions I may have to write down and come back session 2 with a more in-depth answer, or feel free to email me after the session. And if I can't answer it right off the top of my head, happy to help you look into it and see what I can do for an answer after the session. All right, so the first steps, which I've sort of alluded to already, is don't try to do everything yourself. It can be super intimidating to start putting your own product out there. You've got, this amazing product. It's your baby. You've worked so hard on it. And it tastes amazing and you want to get it out into the market as quickly as possible. But it's not always necessarily just your responsibility to do it on your own, and you shouldn't necessarily feel that pressure to do it all by yourself. Consider other people helping you out with it. Now, budgets are always a concern. I totally understand that, but the importance of getting the label right the first time is incredibly high. So one of the main points that I would recommend here where this comes into play is considering high risk orders. So for instance, if you're a beverage, you understand how expensive packaging can be. Those cans are not cheap. The labels are not cheap. If you're sticking a label on there, that's an expensive order. And it can be alluring to a food owner to go into doing your research into packaging. And then you realize, oh, I can get printed cans if I order 500,000 of them at a time, and I can drop my COGS down where it's, I'm starting to make a better margin, and that's where I want to get. But if you have even a minor detail that is not shored up on that label, and you've gone in and printed 500,000 cans, you can't return those. And so if they're not usable, then you are in the hole with a major financial burden, and you have a whole truckload of cans that you then cannot use, you can't put your food into, and you can't sell. So that is just an incredibly important piece. So not only just cans, but if you're printing boxes, even if you're printing labels, volume is the game in CPG. When you're trying to make things work financially, you're trying to increase your volume to increase your margin, right? You're trying to drive your cost of goods down so you can get a better margin, and so you can make more money on the product that you're trying to sell. And it can be people get caught really all the time trying to order large amounts of packaging, and especially if it's printed or something like that, that if they don't really ensure that it's totally covered and it's been reviewed and it's ready to go and it's acceptable for sale at the market, that they can get stuck with a huge order and a huge financial burden and not be able to use it. And it can be crushing for smaller brands. So A, be careful with large orders anytime you're considering that. And B, make sure you have third-party review, or you have other, at minimum, other sets of eyes, but make sure you have that reviewed too, so you can feel as confident as possible going into that order and putting that product into the market. Which sort of leads into number two. These are basically the same thing. Get multiple sets of eyes. I can't tell you how many times. I mean, we're a small group. There's 5 of us in my company. We will send labels around to each other in a series of, cascading reviews where we each review a label for our own input. And the third person down the line will catch something that the first 2 people didn't. There's always importance in getting multiple sets of eyes on food packaging for review, whether it be the nutrition facts panel, the ingredients statement, claims, layout, principal display panel information. All of it is really, truly important. And make sure, if you're the only, maybe you're a solo person doing this, and you've looked at this label for hours on end, and you could still just sort of be skipping over something that you're not seeing. So it's really important to get even an outside set of eyes on a label prior to going to print, to, again, save yourself headaches, save yourself time, and save yourself the investment going into that label. And of course, we want to go all the way to the worst case scenario. You've put your food in a package, you put it out in the market, and then you're facing a recall because there's incorrect allergen information on the label or something like that. Of course, nobody wants to think about that, but it happens. It's expensive. It's a problem. So again, don't be afraid to spend the time that it takes to review your label, get multiple sets of eyes on it, and make sure that you're confident in it before you go to print. And then understand where you are selling. California obviously has the Prop 65 regulations. They have certain regulations that don't apply to the other, the rest of the states in the country in terms of specific ingredients that can be in there, like bleached flour versus unbleached flour. If you're selling a product like a baked good that has bleached flour in it, you're not going to be able to sell that in California. So there are certain things that you have to make sure. You have to have your Prop 65 warning on there. So there are different things that make sure you know where you're selling, where you expect to be selling, especially if you're in the process of ramping up, growing your business, and you're expanding or going to a co-manufacturer. So make sure you know where you're expecting to sell and where you're expecting to grow into for retailers for where you want to sell this product, because that's going to dictate what elements need to be on your label, whether it's regulations for labeling in Canada, regulations for labeling in Mexico, California. All of these things can apply. So again, if you don't understand these details yourself, find help, ask somebody who knows, go out and seek the expertise prior to going to print. You're going to save yourself a whole lot of headache. On the right here are just some resources. You can go to the FDA. You can try. It's probably more time consuming to try and get somebody to give you an answer. They're not fast, but it's worth asking questions at times and reviewing the online documents if you have the patience to review and the understanding to interpret government language, right? Then there's, of course, there's Bill at Fork Food Lab and his set of resources. There's us. You can come to us with questions or anything like that. There's the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. I am, just such an advocate for cooperative extension programs, specifically University of Maine. My mom worked for the University of Maine Cooperative Extension for more than 20 years. I worked for cooperative extension in Virginia for Virginia Tech. That's where I got my start years ago down in Virginia. I just love cooperative extension programs. Most of their information is free. It's online, it's accessible. They pick up the phone when you call, they get back to you. I highly recommend, if you have questions, go to Cooperative Extension first. If they can't answer it for you, they'll point you in the right direction and help you find somebody who can. So it doesn't have to be Maine, but of course you guys are in Maine, but there are other wonderful programs as well. Cornell, Virginia Tech, NC State, UC Davis, all of these have really robust research programs specifically in food, and they can just be incredible wealths of information and expertise. So I highly recommend finding answers at Cooperative Extension programs. It's just a great free resource for you. And then, of course, there's other food innovation centers. Food testing labs can actually be a great resource. Eurofins is probably one you may have heard of. That's sort of the national name in testing. Eurofins or Mirio Nutrisciences. They're big. They're expensive. They're more pay to play. If you need an answer fast, they'll make you pay a rush order, things like that. But they do have good expertise. I've had good and bad experiences with them across the board. But anyways, they're good. They do have the expertise. They have the ability to work with you on labels and things. And then there's more local labs down here in Boston area. We have two great labs that I work with all the time, Truffle Labs and Advanced Food Labs. They both offer, shelf life testing, but also label guidance. They'll do consulting on labels and nutrition facts panels, or they can do nutrient analyses on your food so that basically you can send your food in, get it tested, and you can have a full readout of exactly what your nutrients are for your food, which is even better than simply doing the calculation through a nutrition program. So there's different ways of creating nutrition panels. We'll get into this a little bit more as we get into that slide. But labs can be a great resource, and a local lab is going to be cheaper and better to work with than one of the bigger labs. And then, of course, there's other third-party consultants. Again, if you want to know who they are or you want to get connected with one, reach out to me. I'm happy to connect you with some of those groups. Those often tend to be used by the larger companies that have the budget for that, but can also be really useful. And sometimes it's really worth the expense to give you peace of mind. All right, so let's jump into actual food labeling here. As you start digging into the 130-page FDA food labeling guide, you're going to read this information first. What's the core component of your packaging? It's the principal display panel. It's that first thing you look at when you see it on a shelf. So it's the front panel of a round can. It's the front panel on a box. It's whatever you expect the consumer to be seeing on shelf as the principal display. So again, portion of the package label most likely to be seen by the consumer. There are a few details you have to have on that. There's no exceptions. You can't mess with this. This has to be on there. You have to have a statement of identity. We'll get into that in just a second. You have to have the net quantity. It's usually in fluid ounces and milliliters if it's a liquid, or ounces and grams if it's a solid. So it's by weight or volume. And then there are certain details, which again, I'm not going to get into the specifics right now. Happy to answer questions later. I'm sure the Pulp and Wire group may get into this as well. But there are certain elements that dictate the size of the font that's actually required. So again, work with a designer, work with somebody that does this regularly. They're going to know this information right off the bat. It's going to be simple for them to implement when they're designing your packaging. But if you're doing everything on your own, you really need to make sure you look into the details here to make sure you're compliant with FDA guidelines. Immediately to the right of your principal display panel. So if you're looking at a cereal box, on the right-hand side, if you're looking at a can, it's the panel immediately to the right is your information panel. And your information panel is nutrition facts, ingredient statement, name, address of manufacturer, packer, or distributor, and any allergy information. So the name or address of your manufacturer, packer, or distributor, that is incredibly important. That's for recall and biosecurity regulations. Happy to answer more questions about that if you have it, but you have to have, if you're a US company or you're manufacturing and packing in the US, you have to have a US-based address for that. For your ingredients list, this is an order of weight in your product. And so this is descending order. So whatever is the highest use by weight in your product is the first ingredient, and then it descends by weight after that. If you don't currently have your manufacturing formulas designed by weight for scaling, do that first thing. That's obviously going to tell you by weight and percentage. what is in your product by weight, right? And how to design your ingredient statement based on what's in your product by weight. Of course, there's the caveats of ingredients that are multi-component, and so you have those in parentheses. One question we get all the time is, oh, okay, so say we have an ingredient like powdered sugar in our product, and the ingredients are cane sugar and maltodextrin. If you can get from your supplier ranges or percentages of, okay, so this is, 80% cane sugar, 20% maltodextrin. If you can get that information from your supplier, it is also possible to break those ingredients out separately in your ingredient statement. So instead of having powdered sugar, you can have cane sugar listed by where its weight falls in your formula, and you could have maltodextrin further down in your formula. That's a bit granular, but we get that question a lot. Again, if you have further questions on that or how it works, please shoot me an email after this, or we can follow up in the Q&A session. Nutrition and allergy labeling. You must list the 9 major allergens. I have another slide on that. We'll talk about it more later. But again, these are the components that have to be on the information panel. There are no exceptions. So digging more into standard of identity. Again, this is unfortunately a bit of a gray area for some products. It has caused a lot of problems with a lot of people I've worked with because we're doing a lot of development on sort of new to market products or things that don't necessarily fit into a category. And it can be challenging to decide, what is the true standard of identity for my product? Of course, the definition is the name established by law or regulation, or in the absence thereof, the common or usual name of the food, if the food has one. So if your product doesn't have a standard of identity, use the most descriptive term or name for the food that you can come up with. It must be on the principal display panel. It has to be at least half the size of the largest print on the PDP. So again, it's misleading to have different labeling on the front principal display panel and then have the statement of identity be like very small print, right? That would be sort of misleading as to what's actually in the package. Again, we can talk about this further. Again, if you have more specific questions, but what the FDA is trying to do here is make sure that you're not misleading consumers and that you're getting the most important information in front of them so they can understand what's in the package, what they're buying, and it's not some fanciful name that is misleading as to what's actually in the package. I included a quick screenshot here, which this is the full list of standard of identities. Each of these are clickable links on the FDA website as to further definitions of how they are defined in terms of percentages and makeup of, fat, protein, carbs, because, certain products may contain the broken out components of one of these, where the original input of an ingredient is not the specifically milk, but it's like broken into its component parts or something, or it's challenging to explain this, but sometimes it can be broken out into its component pieces. As long as what's in the final product contains all the components of the original, even if they're broken apart and put back in, you could still meet that standard of identity for that product. Again, maybe I'm getting too granular here, but I'm sure some of you have got into that question before with your food packaging. All right, your nutrition facts panel. Tip number 1, let somebody else do it. One of the most important parts of a nutrition facts panel, and one of the easiest things to manage this, is software that exists to create this. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Genesis or ESHA software. It's been around for years. For the longest time, they were really the only name in the game. Every food manufacturer had it. Every dietitian used it. Every person creating a label would go to a third party to have them use the software. One problem with that in the past year is that company was acquired by a private equity firm, and they have taken the rates, and they've skyrocketed, 20 times what they used to cost. So getting a nutrition facts panel made now is unfortunately way more expensive, not only for the third parties that are doing it, but for every food manufacturer. It's causing ripples in the industry big time. But they realized this is like the best tool out there to create these. It makes sure it has all the tools to make sure you're fully compliant with FDA regulations. And so it's really important information to have. And of course, this PE firm realized that and purchased them and jacked the prices up, right? So it's really valuable to have. It makes sure it ensures compliance. There are a ton of third parties that offer this service, but there's also universities that offer this service. It just takes a lot of headache out to have somebody else deal with this. But if you do decide to go and do this yourself, or if perhaps you have a version and you want to design it yourself, there are specific guidelines to the design. This list here on the left-hand side, serving size, calories, nutrients, all of these are must-haves on the label. Same with trans fats and added sugars. As of the past 20 years of regulations have changed. Even if they're zero, you have to have zero listed for trans fat and added sugars. As for servings, the serving size has to be comparative to other products in the market. So you can't sell a cookie and change your serving size to 12 grams when the entire rest of the industry is a 28-gram serve, right? You have to comply with where the standard serving sizes fall within the rest of the industry for what a typical serving size is of that product. And again, that can sound not very clear. It's sort of a gray area, but not. There are FDA guidelines on that. It can be figured out pretty easily, but make sure you are compliant with where the standards are for your industry, or for the standards are for what your type of product is. And then, of course, you have to have the number of servings. If you're a multi-serve container, you have to include the number of servings per container. There are a variety of different formats of nutrition facts panels. Sometimes you may have the option, but usually it's dictated by where you're selling and the size of your package. So this picture here with all the different food labels on it is probably really confusing, but it's really just meant to represent the different types of nutrition facts panels you may see on labels. This first one on the left-hand side here, this tall column, the difference in this one is they've chosen a bunch of optional minerals and vitamins to include in the bottom section of their panel. And so they've included, all these additional vitamins and minerals because they're probably a product that contains a significant amount of each of these, and they want to highlight that, and they want to let their consumer know that. Problem being, you need a pretty big package to display that, because there are dictations in the regulations around font size for each of these pieces. So you can't just jam it onto a small label and have it be this big, because if the font size is too small, you won't be compliant. Again, I'm not going to get into all the minutiae details on font sizes and things for design in this presentation. Happy to follow up with them information, but if you're doing that yourself, it's best for you to go through those regs yourself, or work with a group like Pulp and Wire, who will walk through those components with you, or another third party. But anyways, just meant to represent, here's an option of all these different vitamins and minerals you can choose to display if you want. The second option here is the typical display, vitamin C, calcium, iron, potassium. This third display is dual column vitamins and minerals. So again, it takes this one on the left, but actually makes it shorter because it creates a dual column display to help you save space. This fourth one in here is representing the individual serving size, and then also the full container serving size. So sometimes you might see that on packages that are likely to be consumed in a sitting, or like a single use, where a typical serving size can be listed in the calories and the nutrient details for the what it would be a single serving size, but also has the dual panel that displays what would be in the full package if you were to consume the full package. This last one, this big one on the right-hand side, is an example of a multilingual label. It also includes Spanish information on this, perhaps if you're selling the product in Mexico. This long flat one down here is an example of a tabular style. So if you are a long flat package, that again, it's just a different version of displaying the same information. The only one that's not on here is actually a linear version, which it's similar to tabular, but instead of having the lines that break out, everything is just in line in written word. So it'll say, total fat, 13 grams. Sometimes you'll see this on like a candy bar or something like that. But it's similar to tabular, but it's just written out in just wording. And so again here, if you are considering doing this yourself, these are a few software options down here that you could look into. Trustwell is the very expensive version of the Genesis ESHA software. It's incredibly good at what it does. It's just expensive. And if you've ever dealt with that, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Axia is a Nutritionist Pro, is a Swedish software. It's a lot more manual in the ways that you would enter individual specific nutrient information for every single ingredient, but you can get that information from your suppliers. You can get spec sheets that have your 100-gram nutritionals. You can enter that into this system, and it will, if you do that for every ingredient you use, and then you build your formula the way you would build it in your manufacturing facility, it puts out a compliant label, and it's great, and it's way cheaper than Trustwell. So that's for a true, like, if you're very comfortable with food manufacturing, you're very comfortable with spec sheets and entering the information, I would recommend you consider something like that. And then there's this other company, which I'm not as familiar with, but I know they offer this service, Label Calc, similar to Trustwell, where they'll build your labels for you with the inputs. Allergens, again, must be listed with your ingredient statement on the information panel. Only the top 9 allergens are required. So they are sesame, which is new. Make sure everybody's on top of that. As of 2023, you do have to include sesame if you contain any sesame ingredients in your as a top 9 allergen. There's a must label if you have it in there. And then, of course, there's soybeans, wheat, peanuts, tree nuts, which are different, shellfish, fish, eggs, and milk. Of the tree nuts, we get this question a lot. There's also still arguments in terms of FDA draft guidance versus what is actually law, which is a whole nother webinar we could get into. The 12 types of tree nuts recognized by the FDA currently, not just draft guidance, but 12 recognized by the FDA are these 12 here. Most of them are different forms of walnuts, but the ones you'd expect: almonds, Brazil nuts, walnuts, cashews, hazelnuts, macadamia nuts, pecans, pine nuts, pistachios. Coconuts are not, there's been a lot of debate about, do coconuts need to be labeled? Technically, under current FDA guidance, they do not need to be labeled as an allergen. Some people still do. If you are erring on the side of caution and you want to just be as transparent as possible, like this product has coconuts in it, for the minor set of people which are allergic to coconuts, is totally fine. The thing about allergen labeling is a lot of it is technically optional. Where if you want to be as transparent as possible and you want to minimize risk as much as possible, like, yeah, you can list as many things as you want that people could potentially be allergic to. There's a lot of foods outside of the top 9 that technically people are allergic to. It's just such a small subset of people, and sometimes it's just, it just doesn't have the evidence for the IgE mediated response for allergies that it dictates necessity to have as a top 9 allergen. But like, if you want to list it, you can. The only thing you're risking then is just like, are you unintentionally scaring your consumer or causing unnecessary concern among your consumer group? But again, this is your choice. It's a balancing act. You decide what makes sense, what makes the most sense for your brand, and what makes the most sense for you and your consumer, and you understand what your consumer wants. And if it's necessary or you deem it necessary, then by all means, put it on your label. If you don't have any allergens present, you don't have to list any. And then additional optional wording, we get these questions a lot. May contain versus made in a facility that also processes. Here's just a little detail that helps you understand. So may contain is like, you're in a facility where you're often processing peanuts, but you're making a brownie that doesn't have peanuts in it, but you don't have robust controls. And you're not, implementing a lot of concern about how you go back and forth between your peanut brownie and your regular brownie. This indicates potential cross-contamination with other allergens during handling, manufacturing, storage. If you have it in your facility, you process it a lot. It usually is meant to indicate, okay, this is like a higher risk that this product could contain, and not even like a full peanut, but just contain traces of the allergen that could cause a problem, right? And then made in a facility also processes. This makes a lot of sense for people that are concerned, or larger brands or high distribution. If you're in a facility that is processing peanuts, but you're a peanut, you're a you certainly wouldn't want to do this if you're going for a certification for an allergen-free, or if you truly want to be like make a claim about a peanut-free facility. You can't be making it in a facility that also processes peanuts. So it's good. This is really useful wording. I recommend it a lot to pretty much everybody that we work with. If you're in a facility that's processing an allergen, to have this on the label. It's technically not required, but is like very highly recommended across all pieces of the industry in terms of like, does it make sense to have it? Yes. The answer is always yes, to have this information, be as transparent as possible and get this information out there. Use by dates versus best by dates versus expiration dates. None of these are based on food safety. They are all based on quality. That being said, you could have run, like, it makes sense and it's a good idea to run shelf life studies, especially if your product is refrigerated, or if you're expecting this product to reduce in quality or grow mold or yeast after a certain period of time. Is usually, it's obviously most important for things that are perishable, but it never technically indicates a food safety concern. It is supposed to be based on quality, which in the same circumstance would be a food safety control, right? So best by and use by indicates the peak quality. So it's usually used by this date because after this date, it's either going to be growing mold or yeast or some form of microbial growth, or it's going to degrade, it's going to stale, it's going to change color, it's going to be a suboptimal user experience, and that is going to damage your brand as well, right? So both quality and food safety are controls that are going to damage, what the consumer perceives of your product when they consume it. So choosing what makes the most sense for you is most important. Again, I highly recommend, if you have a perishable product, to run a microbial growth study. Again, there's labs in Boston. I think there's some labs in Maine. I know Katahdin Labs does some testing on shelf life study, things like that. If you need help finding the lab that's right for you, again, shoot me an email. Happy to help. But really important to include this information for consumer understanding of like when to use this product. And again, it's usually based on quality. But if you do know a food safety control, then you build your use by date, with a acceptable buffer before that. So again, this also saves you money, because if you have product on shelf at Whole Foods that starts molding, Whole Foods is going to have a problem with that too, not just your consumer. So this is not only a consumer control, but also, goes into like your relationship with your retailer. If you have product that's on shelf, that's molding, that's going bad, they're going to not be happy about that. They're going to make you buy it back. You're going to be lucky if you hold on to your shelf space as well, right? There's only so many times that they're going to want to throw away product for you, which could be your sell by or expiration date, right? That's more for the stores to understand how long they should display this product for sale, so that they know when to pull it off the shelf. If it needs to be pulled, ideally, you're getting the pull through that's turning over and you don't have to worry about this, but they do need to know when it should be coming off shelf to save yourself the headache of consumers finding, product that's gone bad, or also just, having the stores know how long to display the item. And also, this will often be required by retailers, so they don't have that headache in the first place. Many retailers won't take a product in, depending on the category you're in, if there's 60% or less of its shelf life. they'll turn the order right around. So there's really tight logistics in terms of, do you build up stock in manufacturing and then slowly sell that out to your distribution centers over time? You have to be careful that your expiration date doesn't get too close to when that product is going to hit a shelf, because a retailer might reject that and send it back if it only has 3 months left on its shelf life when they're expecting to retail it for 6. So this is really important, both financially and in terms of value to your brand, of how you control these pieces and what works best for you to label on your product, depending on the category you're in and depending on, how you're retailing this item. Choose which best communicates your product's expected quality to your consumers and to your retailers. I should probably hurry up so we have time for questions. So I'll just go through these last 2 pieces. This is a cheat sheet that we will email out to all the participants. It's just sort of a PDF that basically has the bullet points on everything I just went through. I think they may have sent you one already, but I did notice I had a mistake on this. I only had the 8 allergens instead of the 9. I didn't update my own document. Sorry about that. But we'll email out an updated cheat sheet for you after this, in addition to the slides, if anybody wants the slides. And we're done. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. Should I stop sharing my screen, Christine?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take your slides down, and then we can all come back on camera and do an interactive Q&A, because I saw some questions coming through as you were presenting. So,
and I wasn't monitoring the chat, so I haven't looked at any of the questions yet, but
That's
no
all right.
problem.
I can ask you them.
Yeah.
okay.
So I believe I think you actually covered the first one that we got was from Kay about using software for to generate nutrition panels, and you put some great suggestions there if people want to use that. Kay particularly talk about Recipal. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but is that something you would recommend?
Yeah, Recipal is another software. I don't use it personally. It always pops up as like an available software to use. My understanding is it's a lot more catered to nutrition type use, where people are attempting to understand recipes they're creating at home and they want to know what they're getting for nutrients out of, what's the fat content, carb content, protein. I believe they've also built it out to include food manufacturing capabilities. So forgive me for not being super familiar with the software itself, but I believe it is a tool that also works.
Great, thank you. And then a question about how large do you need to be for these nutrition labels to be required? So if a business is selling in Maine only and it's selling less than a certain volume of units or gross sales, and it's selling direct to customer versus not, are there any requirements that people can get away with without labeling, or does everything have to be on everything?
There are caveats for cottage food laws in Maine and every state in terms of size of business and also type of product. So for like baked goods, don't require a nutrition label, but you do have to have ingredient statements and allergens listed. And forgive me, I've lost track. I used to, when I was with Cooperative Extension, I could have answered this question a lot faster. So there are exemptions. Again, this is one of those questions where I'd want to look into Maine law specifically before I answer this more thoroughly. But I will say off the top, there are specific exemptions for really small businesses, and it depends on the type of product you're selling. I know specifically things like baked goods, cookies, brownies, bread, things that are under typical exemption for cottage food laws wouldn't require all these details we're talking about today. Contact Maine Cooperative Extension, shoot me an email after this. I can look into it, but I can answer yes, but I can't give you the details off the top of my head.
Great. So we could also Google cottage food laws in Maine and probably come up with some answers as well.
You could, well, so I will say that can also be dangerous, because you can get the home consumer that puts a blog up that says you can do whatever you want, and they like sort of you could end up running into this anti-government people that think they can do whatever they want. So I would be wary of that. I would try to go to some form of a cooperative extension or university or something that can help you interpret that, because it can be a little bit dangerous to just hit the internet with it. Yeah.
Good advice. And larger regional retailers will require nutrition ingredients.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then moving on to allergens, are mollusks considered shellfish, therefore an allergen?
Oh, Matt. Oh, geez. Again, I'm not the person to answer this question. I believe so. There's been, it's, and not to go off on a tangent here, but this is really challenging for like seaweed producers, right? In terms of what are they subject to? Because oftentimes there are like snails and things that are attached to seaweed, and how do you make sure it's not on there when it goes through processing? And like, do you have to run ppm testing on every single batch for do you truly contain it? And so this is in the works. There's a lot of questions hitting the USDA and FDA on this. So there's draft guidance, there's discussions happening right now. I will say I believe it's not clearly defined, even at the federal level. So I can't give you an answer on this right now. Again, Matt, this is something I'd love to talk with you about and dig into with you if you want to jump on a call or something. I've been down this road a little bit in terms of seafood producers. So again, glad I said it earlier. I'm sorry I can't give you an answer right now, but happy to help you find an answer.
Great, thank you. And I think you probably just answered Allison's question about allergens in kelp products. So I think
Oh,
that's probably
there you go, Allison. You're on it too. Yeah, absolutely. It's there. I believe there are some groups, even in Maine, that have, again, been down this road. They've had this discussion. They've involved the USDA, FDA in this. And I believe kelp processing can be considered where you don't have to list the allergen, but at the same time, it's like the way I picture this from a brand owner perspective, I would, especially if I was small, would err on the side of caution, right? Where it's like, look, this is a seafood product. This came from the sea. There are mollusks and shellfish in the sea. And like, until you get a clear answer from a regulatory agency and until you feel confident, like unless you're actually testing your product for true ppms of allergens, then like I would be err on the side of caution. And that goes not only for seaweed or other, goes for like anything that you're processing. If you're in a shared facility, if you're in, if you're processing things with other allergens, it's always safe to err on the side of caution as long as you don't think it's significantly detrimental to your brand or your consumer, right? If it's just simply saying something on your package that you don't think will heavily impact who's going to buy your product, then be safe, right? Until you get really clear direction from FDA or you implement a testing plan in your facility where you're testing lots. You're sending each lot out for allergen testing, or you're testing on site with a kit you can test on site or something like that.
Great, thank you. This one we hear a lot. If you make products that are gluten-free, dairy-free, and are made in a facility that is dedicated to gluten-free products but is not certified, can you say gluten-free on your packaging without saying certified?
Absolutely. Yes, you can. You do still want to run ppm testing. Gluten testing is not expensive. They make kits, the Romer kits. There's a couple brands that make kits you can test right on site where it's just swab testing. You do need to be under the 20 ppm, 20 parts per million gluten in your end product for USDA standards or FDA standards. But you absolutely can say gluten-free on it. Yeah.
And is there a label approval process with the FDA that manufacturers need to go through prior to bringing products to market?
No, that would be great, right? That's sort of the reason we're here, right? Like that would be wonderful, but it would also get incredibly bogged down, I'm sure. So it would take you, 6 months to get a product to market. So that's why we had this presentation, right? Like that's why there's multiple resources out there where you can go to. Again, it's super unfortunate that there isn't one. It would be great if there was a formal process where you could go, hey, okay, our label's ready. Let's send it to the FDA so they can give us the thumbs up. But they don't do that, right? So unfortunately, no. But again, that's where you involve other sets of eyes, other resources. obviously everybody's working on a budget here. You don't want to just throw money at the wall and pay for a third party consultant to review, but like do your best. Use all the pieces we've discussed today. Try and find free resources or access to mentors, can take a look at it and review and have an idea of where you're at. And again, it also depends on the risk level, right? Are you trying to print a million labels? Like, yeah, maybe go to a consultant for that. So you can feel confident. If you're running, 1,000 labels or something, like, yeah, get some extra eyes on it, but it's not an extreme risk for a product like that.
Great. And we have a dry product that needs to be cooked and we generate the panel based on the dry ingredients. Is that the correct way to do it?
So we have a dry product that needs to be cooked. We generate the panel based on the dry ingredients. Is that the correct way to do it? We add salt for the cooked version of the product, but generate. So I guess I need more information.
Yeah.
So basically, if you're adding an input and it's present in the final product, then absolutely that input needs to be included in the calculation. So I'm still a little bit confused on the question. I want to find it again. I lost it. Where'd it go?
I lost it too. I think it was from Kay. So maybe Kay, if you could add some more context to that. There's also,
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say it went over into the answered tab, so you can find it there. I think we were just
Okay.
trying to like shuffle them through. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, clicked it too fast. Dry product that needs to be cooked. You generate the panel based on the dry ingredients. As long as the dry ingredients, so basically the only thing you're not calculating is the water, right? Oh, okay. So you're saying sodium's showing up really high because you're not calculating for the percentage of water that goes into it. So your nutrition facts panel should be generated off total weight, right? So if you're, 90% water with 5% salt in there, you don't generate it just on you do include water in the weight of the final product. So it's percentage of final product is what you evaluate, not percentage of what went in, if that makes sense. So Kay, take the percentage of the final percentage of what it is in your finished product, and that is how you'd calculate the sodium percent.
and I think that also helps answer another question. Is it necessary to list water by weight on ingredient lists?
That depends. If you are like a cracker and you add water in, but then you subsequently bake that water out, no. Pretty much everything else. And again, there are caveats to this. Usually, yes. Yeah, usually you have to add it. Again, it's usually for something where you've actually subsequently removed the water, like the water was just for processing, like creating a dough, but then you bake it and then the baked water is out. Then you don't have to list it, but pretty much everything else you do.
Right. And then sorry.
Oh, I just want to follow up with that because like water is an ingredient as well. And so that's also really important just on a product development side of things, like making sure your water input is safe. So potable water, if you are using water, like water is considered an ingredient, right? Which again is like why it needs to be listed. Because water is handled as an ingredient, it needs to be safe going in. It's got to be potable water going in too.
I just want to jump in quickly. I know we're approaching the 9:30 mark, and I don't know if you have time to stay on for a few more questions, or what folks. Okay. There's about, as you can see, 11 or so outstanding questions. So there might be some consolidation, and or what we've done in the past is anything that we don't get to, we make sure that our presenters answer and we can send that information back out to folks. So maybe give it another 5 to 10 and we might get some folks that have some other commitments, but we'll work to get through these. So thank you.
Great. We also have another allergen one on nuts. If you already say contains tree nuts, do you also have to specify the nut it contains, like pecans?
That's usually really helpful. So I believe it's optional in terms of as long as you say tree nuts, you're covered for listing the allergen. But oftentimes it's really helpful for the consumer because they may not be specifically allergic to every tree nut. So it's really helpful to the consumer to disclose which tree nut it is if you have tree nut.
Great. And then I'm not sure if you would have time to get into this now, but are there additional requirements for kids' food products? I believe the answer is yes, but
So specifically for infants, in infant formulas, there are for kids' food products. It's funny, there aren't like technically more specific regulations on it for anything outside of infant formula. But that being said, you have to know your consumer. And a lot of times when you're creating a product for children, you want to make a lot of claims or you want to push a lot of pieces of this to cater to like, oh, this is school safe, so kids can take it to school, or like that often gets into the issue of claim territory. That's the bigger problem. So it's not like, oh, this product's for kids, it's subject to these FDA requirements. It's just like any other food product. But the issue is when you get into claims and certifications. Because that's where most people go with their packaging, or that's the reason they're creating something for kids specifically, is they want to make some sort of claim as to why it's good for kids or why kids should eat it. And that's where you get into the regulatory concern.
great. And then going back to Prop 65, if your product is sold into California by a distributor and not labeled, are you the manufacturer liable? And another one that comes up a lot, if you do DTC into California, so you're shipping from Maine to California, do you have to have the Prop 65 on that?
You're liable for both. Yeah.
All right. Quick question. Kay's looking.
Usually they're tough.
Kay's asking where you get the test kits for the gluten tests, I believe.
Yeah, so there's this one company called Romer Labs, Romer. There's a handful of they're independent companies that you buy these test kits that are, compliant with, the lab ISO required, whatever they are. So different test kits you can buy from accredited groups online. I can send a follow-up with a few, but I know Romer off the top of my head is one of them.
Great. And then there's some political resistance to vegan products, but are there actual legal taboos against referencing vegan ice cream? So I feel like it's like a milk question or a cauliflower rice question. Like, can you say vegan ice cream instead of saying frozen dessert?
So again, you first start with understanding your statement of identity. So are you trying to call it ice cream or, frozen? So that's more of a statement of identity issue. And again, I don't off the top of my head know if there's a specific statement of identity for ice cream, or B, what it entails in terms of the regulations. That's where I would start, is look up, is there a specific statement of identity for ice cream? In which case, does it state it must be cow's milk that is the milk component of it, or something like that? So that's sort of a cascading question. You're going to have to do some research on this, where you first dig into statement of identity, and then, okay, under the statement of identity, does it say it must contain X% milk and X% sugar in each of those components? And if so, that's why you need to call it a frozen dessert, not necessarily just because of the vegan. So I would say that's more of a statement of identity issue versus like people being mad that it's got oat milk in it. Yeah.
That's good. Brad shared a resource that he's been using to that he references for the exemption that we talked about earlier on there. Mads had a question about packaging restrictions or regulations when it comes to brand forward story driven coffee. Is there any kind of restrictions on that from your side of things?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So again, this will be probably answered in session 2, which is more of like when you're talking, okay, well, this is about my brand and this is the story, like you can tell your story, you can talk about your brand, but if you start making claims, that's going to get you in hot water. So unless you're adherent to what the claims, unless you're within the regulatory guidelines of meeting those claims. So you can tell your story, you can, there's a lot of things to do when it comes to your brand. But you get into not trouble, but you start getting into, under the scope if you're making specific claims tied to that brand story or something like that. So that's more, we'll probably answer session 2, even session 3, again, with the Pulp and Wire folks, we'll get into that in further detail. So it's maybe, depends on what you want to say.
Great. And I think we probably covered the other 2 questions as we were going through things. So thank you, Ian. That was really, really insightful and interesting.
Cool. All right. That's my first time giving it. So I'm glad it went well. Seemed to go okay.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Well, we just want to wrap things up this morning. Ian, thank you so much for your time. Also, thank you to the partners of Selling More Maine Foods. And just another plug that, Ian, you'll be back on the 5th for session 2, getting into some of the more specifics, which I know you did a nice plug for that. I did drop your email and website into the chat for folks who want to connect again. And we'll be sure to follow up with the slides and your updated attachment as well, and a recording within the week. So thank you again. We really appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good morning.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.